morning, buenos dias, bonjour, sin chao, ni hao. Today we're going to be talking about chapter 6 of The Handmaid's Tale. So first we're going to do a quick summary, then we'll dig into some of the more grittier, deeper analysis, the line by line, close reading stuff, and then at the end of the video we'll do a vocabulary. The literal reading of this chapter is the narrator, Offred, and another handmaid of Glenn are taking a walk. So they're on their way to the store and they pass by the church and the cemetery. They see a couple of gravestones and memento moris, which are sort of foreboding or foreshadowing. And then they end up at the wall. And hanging on the wall are the bodies of a number of men who have bags over their heads and drawings on their chests. So the drawings are of aborted fetuses, and the bags over their head are presumably covering their identities, but they also make them look like scarecrows and give them sort of eerie, creepy veil, which is another sort of mirror to the veils that the handmaids themselves are wearing. And we're told that one of the dead doctors has a red smile from the blood dripping from his mouth, so it's a very dark chapter. Get into the thicker sort of more in-depth analysis now. So, as with many of the chapters, Atwood likes to give us a hint of what's to come with her first line. So in the first line here, we hear that the narrator has a choice, or the narrator and Evelyn have a choice of which path to take. Obviously here there's some symbolism for the path that America has taken in Gilead, or the path of religious righteousness, versus maybe the path of a heathen or of a chaotic world, or the path less taken. And Offred tells us we already know which way we'll take because we always take that way, right? So there's also this reference here to the thought control and the idea that even though it feels like they have a choice of left or right, in fact, we know that their minds are already set. Their neural pathways have been re-educated, right? They've been brain warped at the Red Center by Aunt Lydia and the other aunts, and they've been re-educated into believing a certain way. So they know which path they're taking, because there's really only one path. Conversely, so she also tells us, again, referencing this habit, the red costume or uniform they're wearing, that they've been given our wings like blinkers, right? Again, this idea like they're being blinded. And she says it's hard to look up, it's hard to get the full view, to see the whole picture, the bigger picture of anything that's going on. And so she says we've learned to see the world in gasps. So what is a gasp? It's when you're gasping for air, right? So there's this image here, this idea that the narrator, and both her thinking and her vision, her ability to see the world around her and perceive it, has been choked or asphyxiated by the suffocating presence of this new regime, this totalitarian. So I think Atwood's really saying to us here, who gasps, right? When do you gasp? Well, you gasp when you're being choked, when someone's throttling you, when you're literally being asphyxiated and you can't get enough air. So there's this idea that the air has been sucked out of her, right? She can't breathe. The walls are closing in on her. This idea that fundamentalism is narrowing her thought, narrowing her choices, and ultimately suffocating her. We know she has nowhere to go, right? She's not allowed to take the subway. She's not allowed to take a second path. So the narrator tells us, or in essence goes to another place inside her mind. She looks to her memories, and she says, quote, when we think of the past, it's the beautiful things we pick out. So of course, as a reader, we're ready for some of this beautiful imagery or some of the nice nostalgic moments where she thinks about Luke or her daughter. And then what actually happens is something different. They cross by the cemetery, and in the cemetery, there's this thing called a memento mori. So a memento mori literally is a reminder of death. And in this case, it's the stone angels on gravestones, the statues, the carvings, the inscriptions that you'd see in a cemetery. But what's literally happening too is the narrator is being reminded of her own mortality, right? Of time slipping away, of the fact that she too will die soon. So let's talk about the wall for a moment. There's some obvious imagery, symbolism here of a wall as being like a mental block, as stopping the path of your mind or of your body, preventing you from getting in or out. The idea of separation that starts in chapter 1, when we're told there's a fence with razor wire, etc., and guards around it. But then there's also these sort of older, more deeper references, right? Like a wall, like the Great Wall of China, or the Wailing Wall in what is now Israel, or the gates of Auschwitz, or the gates of hell, right? There's this idea of the ultimate sort of barrier, right? Where the decider of who is inside and who is outside of the wall. And ultimately that's what this book is about. It's about creating borders, both mental and physical, that separate the us from the them. They're creating a binary world, and that's ultimately who wants to build walls, right? When there's a group that wants to keep the foreigners or the barbarians outside of the gates. When the narrator first sees the bodies, she talks about how they're hung on steel hooks that look like question marks. These steel hooks are a reminder of the butcher shop, All Flesh, that she's just visited, where she's seen the meat hanging on hooks. And now she sees the men hanging on hooks. Again, this is just a reference to how easy it is for your life to be taken from you in this world, how little control that people in Gilead have over their bodies. This is also the bodies clearly are acting here as a spectacle, so they're meant to scare. Atwood tells us they're literally scarecrows, or they look like scarecrows. She also tells us that their heads, hanging limp with gravity, have become zeros or O's. So zero in the sense that they're thoughtless, they have nothing to give. But I think also in this idea that each of the bodies is a statistic. They're another zero, right? They're another number, the dead tallied up. The narrator is being told, in other words, the propaganda or the state ideas that are being spread around Gilead are saying that these doctors are called angel makers and that they've committed war crimes or atrocities. So we really are understanding too that it's been a violent takeover or rebellion. These people that have come to control what was once America and is now Gilead have started a war to do so. They've taken control by force. So the end of functioning democracy. Abortions are now considered atrocities. So I think this is again referring to the palimpsest and history being rewritten. This is the idea that the losers of war become war criminals, right? Whoever is now in power gets to decide what's right and what's wrong. In the New World, they're war criminals, and their job, their former duty, is now an atrocity that they've committed. So they're retroactively being punished for a change in thinking or a change in the totalitarian state. So Offred literally tells us that the men are anachronisms, right? So there's something that's gone out of date, they've expired, their thinking, their functioning, their use to society is no longer valid. And this thought that they're from the wrong era or they're somehow a part of the wrong time is likewise, I think, a throwback to the earlier chapters where she's talking about the furniture, and we get this idea of archaic furniture and all this sort of collection of bric-a-brac in the household. And these are things that have been kept around even though they don't necessarily have a use, right? Their only current use is symbolic. So the doctor's only current use in Gilead is to be hung up and turned into a scarecrow, right? A literal body bag to be stuffed, like the bags of meat from All Flesh, or the bag that Offred was worried would suffocate her daughter. Well, now these men are scarecrows, and their intention, their body, is to scare the survivors in Gilead, to scare them straight, and to literally asphyxiate their thoughts or minds, the same way that Offred was worried the plastic bag would asphyxiate or strangle her daughter. So we finish with another quote from Lydia. Remember, Lydia is the first convert, so she's the first person converted by the apostle, and hence she's giving out the word of Scripture, or the word of Gilead, to the other handmaids and Marthas and whoever else she's inculcating or re-educating. She says, "This may not seem ordinary to you now, but it will after a time." I think finally what we understand from this chapter is that science, right? Scientists and doctors are dead. Their way of thinking is an anachronism, and the way to think is now the same as the religious fundamentalists who've taken totalitarian control. So ultimately, there's been a war that's taken place, and science is the loser, and religion is the winner. Okay, so let's do a quick vocab recap from chapter 6. So our first word is hesitant. So when you hesitate, You're unsure of yourself. You're not ready. Similar to which path to take, right? You pause, you stumble, you freeze up. You're unable to be decisive. You're hesitant. Somber means like dark, gloomy. Comes from ombre, so it comes from shade. So it literally means something that's shaded or shadowed. Conceive. This is definitely Atwood playing with her double meaning, double entendre again. On the one hand, to conceive means literally a woman gets pregnant, she conceives a baby, conception. On the other hand, it's a mental thing, to form an idea or to conceive of a new plan. To hatch a new plan is to conceive this new plan. Anachronism literally comes from the Greek backwards time, anachronism, so literally back time. And it means something that's in the wrong period or out of era, out of place, right? So, you think about dandyism or, someone using a hand wind clock or something like that. It's some piece of machinery or thing that's out of date and out of place. And this is what we're told about the doctors who are hanging on the wall. They're anachronisms. Their function is obsolete. That's all for chapter 6. We will be back with chapter 7 of A Handmaid's Tale very shortly. Take care.